Billionaire flies abroad for secret meeting with mistress pregnant wife, exposes him with one call. Picture perfect wealth, a sprawling mansion, and the promise of a fairy tale marriage. This is the life Richard Harrington and his pregnant wife, Clara, once believed they had built. But behind their glimmering facade lies a storm of secrecy and betrayal, waiting for just the right moment to blow everything apart. When Richard flies abroad on a so-called business trip, Clara grows suspicious, her looming due date overshadowed by anxiety. A single phone call uncovers a tangle of lies thicker than they ever imagined. This explosive revelation threatens not only Richard's reputation, but also Clara's fragile hope for a loving family. The grand, ivory-coloured Harrington mansion, perched atop the rolling hills of Brentwood, was more than just a home. It was a monument to Richard Harrington's relentless ambition. From the outside, the marble pillars and Italian-style fountains evoked a life of ease and grace. Every visitor was greeted by meticulously kept rose gardens, and inside, the glitter of chandeliers and polished mahogany floors boasted of tremendous wealth. Yet, step deeper into the sprawling corridors, and one would notice the tense, uncomfortable quiet that occasionally settled in the living areas. When the staff thought no one was watching, they sometimes exchanged anxious glances. A once lively household had evolved into a place of stifled sighs and hushed conversations. Although Clara Harrington tried her best to maintain a sunny demeanor, the strain was evident in her delicate features. She was nearing the final trimester of her pregnancy, her entire being brimming with anticipation for the arrival of their first child, a child she hoped would be the catalyst for a deeper, more genuine love in their marriage. Clara had been born Clara Everton, the daughter of a small-town schoolteacher and a mechanic in Asheville, North Carolina. She was not unaccustomed to a simple life. Once, she had dreamed of moving to the city to study fine arts. That was before she met Richard during a charity event in New York City. He was a rising star in the high-stakes world of real estate investments. Tall, broad-shouldered, and confidently clad in a tailored suit, Richard exuded a magnetism that swept Clara off her feet. Their romance bloomed quickly, propelled by lavish vacations to places like Lake Como and Bora Bora, sparkly gifts and heartfelt letters that once made Clara feel like the luckiest woman on earth. It wasn't long before Richard, enthralled by Clara's kind heart and artistic perspective, proposed on the observation deck of the Empire State Building. The city lights served as their witness. Tears of joy streamed down Clara's face as she said yes. In that moment, she had felt life was offering her a fairy tale. Soon, they were married in a sumptuous ceremony in Napa Valley. The wedding photos featured rolling vineyards, white roses, and a euphoric Clara in a flowing lace gown. Family and friends toasted the newlyweds late into the night, and the glow on Richard's face seemed to reflect the depth of his devotion. Or so Clara believed. In truth, Richard's ambitious nature never waned. With a single-minded focus, he turned what had been a small real estate brokerage into an empire called Harrington Holdings. By the time Clara became pregnant, the company was worth hundreds of millions. Their success had soared beyond their wildest dreams, and Richard's name was often mentioned in the same breath as top moguls like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates in the local business papers, though. In reality, he had not achieved that level of wealth or influence. But there was talk. Everywhere they went, there was talk. Wealth was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allowed Clara to explore philanthropic endeavors, such as fundraising for the local children's hospital and championing art programs in underprivileged schools. On the other, it exposed them to the relentless gaze of tabloids and the snide remarks of acquaintances who believed money could solve every problem. Moreover, it drew Richard into the circles of those whose moral compasses twisted easily for the sake of profit or pleasure. Even in those early days, Clara sometimes noticed faint shadows in Richard's eyes, shadows of restlessness or unspoken burdens. She convinced herself it was the pressure of running a business. Love, after all, required patience and forgiveness. Her own mother's advice echoed in her mind: marriage isn't always the honeymoon, honey. Sometimes it's a test of how strong you really are. Clara felt strong. She was determined to be the supportive wife, standing beside her husband, come what may. Little did she know how profoundly that vow would be tested. Long before the cracks began to show, Richard's life had been shaped by a desire to transcend his own humble upbringing. Born to a middle-class family in Portland, Maine, his father was an insurance broker and his mother a part-time nurse. While they had made a comfortable living, Richard always yearned for more. The grit and determination he displayed as a teenager were awe-inspiring. He spent summers mowing lawns and winters shoveling snow to earn extra money. His restless ambition led him to a business scholarship at the University of Pennsylvania, where he impressed professors with his entrepreneurial instincts. In his 20s, Richard relocated to New York, longing to break into the real estate scene. He thrived in a cutthroat environment, quickly making a name for himself by flipping small apartment buildings in emerging neighborhoods. With each successful sale, his confidence soared. He found that money was indeed a powerful key, unlocking doors to exclusive clubs, political fundraisers, and swanky galas, where a man of wealth was not just admired, but aggressively courted. It was at one such fundraiser where he spotted Clara. She wore a simple yet elegant black dress, her dark hair swept into a modest updo. Something about her wide, earnest eyes, reflecting a genuine spirit amid all the artifice, caught his attention. By the end of that night, he had introduced himself. Though he was typically brash with women, there was a gentleness to his approach with Clara that surprised even him. The synergy they shared was magnetic. Clara's authenticity balanced the edges of Richard's ambition. It was as if she reminded him of where he came from, of the down-to-earth existence he had once known. Yet she also saw the spark in him, admired his drive to become someone greater than his origins might have suggested. After their wedding, the demands of Harrington Holdings increasingly consumed Richard's time. Marathon meetings, flights to various cities to secure major deals, and cocktail parties with potential investors formed the backbone of his schedule. While Clara yearned for the nights they used to spend cooking dinner together and talking about their day, Richard was often absent, claiming he had to entertain important clients. Each missed date night left her with the sting of disappointment, but she dismissed it as part of marrying a busy executive. Clara clung to small consolations, their romantic weekend getaways to cozy bed and breakfasts, the sweet notes Richard tucked into her coat pocket every so often, the way he talked about wanting a family, a legacy someday. But as Harrington Holdings grew, so did the swirl of gossip. The business world whispered rumors of Richard's more flexible ethical judgments. Some said he made under the table deals with unscrupulous realtors in Hong Kong and Eastern Europe. He was also rumored to mingle with high-profile socialites, known for their willingness to close deals in ways that extended beyond finance. Clara disliked hearing these insinuations, but she found no concrete evidence to confirm them. She still believed in her husband's essential decency, or wanted to. After all, she had built her entire life around this marriage. When Clara discovered she was pregnant, Richard responded with a rush of affection. He had tears in his eyes, hugging her tightly as if he had never wanted anything more. She believed him wholeheartedly. It seemed like the perfect moment, the grand next chapter. Perhaps with a baby on the way, Richard would slow down and cherish the intangible rewards of fatherhood. To her disappointment, it didn't happen. Instead, he dove even deeper into work. Meetings bled late into the night, travel schedules expanded, and a flurry of new opportunities beckoned him. Though it troubled her, Clara recognized that Richard had never done anything halfway in his life. When he set his mind on something, he gave it everything he had. Maybe once the baby is born, everything will change, she told herself, stroking her growing belly in the quiet evenings. Yet a creeping unease began to invade her thoughts. She caught him responding to texts at odd hours, locked away in his study for phone calls that ended abruptly whenever she walked by. If she asked him directly, he'd placate her with broad smiles and reassurance that it's just business. He offered excuses so smoothly that Clara questioned whether she was imagining problems that didn't exist. Clara's intuition, however, whispered otherwise. Motherhood had awakened an extra layer of discernment. Her protective instincts for her unborn child were heightening her ability to sense things that Richard's sweet words couldn't mask. Still, she remained quiet, uncertain whether she was overreacting. In her father's simpler days, people never traveled so frequently, nor did they manage global businesses from their smartphones. She reminded herself that the world had changed. Maybe she just needed to adapt. Yet the seeds of suspicion had been planted, and in the Harrington mansion so grand that it sometimes felt more like a museum than a home, those seeds would not wither. They would root themselves in each well-appointed room, each silent corridor, slowly preparing to bloom into a crisis that would shatter illusions and push both Richard and Clara to the brink. One crisp autumn morning, Clara found herself alone in the master bedroom, rummaging through the closet for a scarf. She and Richard were set to attend an upscale charity brunch for the Los Angeles Art Academy, an event she treasured because it combined her passion for art with her philanthropic pursuits. Outside, the leaves had begun to fall, adding a rare seasonal shimmer to California's typical sunshine. As she scrolled past an array of designer shawls, she noticed a black garment bag that wasn't hers. It was distinctly masculine, with the Harrington Holdings emblem embroidered on the front. It wasn't the bag that caught her attention per se, but rather its placement. Richard generally kept his suits in a separate walk-in closet. Curious, Clara unzipped it. Inside was a strikingly elegant tuxedo she had never seen Richard wear. A tiny detail that gave her pause. In the pocket was a receipt from a shop in Milan, dated a mere month ago, during a period he'd told her he'd been on a business trip to Berlin. Baffled, she carefully put everything back in place and closed the closet door, her heart pounding in her chest. Memories surfaced of Richard's stammering explanation for why he had been unreachable for nearly 24 hours on that trip. What if something really was off, she wondered. She quelled the surge of apprehension, rationalizing that perhaps his flight had been rerouted, or he had spontaneously decided to shop in Italy if he had a stopover. Nonetheless, the lie about being in Berlin rather than Milan triggered alarm bells. Why would he feel compelled to lie? Later that afternoon, during the drive to the charity brunch, Clara wrestled with the urge to bring up the tuxedo. Richard, absorbed in a phone call, barely acknowledged her presence. The hum of the Bentley's engine provided a low background noise as Clara tried to calm her anxious mind. One part of her was itching to yank the phone out of his hand and demand an explanation. Another part feared an overreaction, especially given her pregnancy. As she absent-mindedly ran a hand over her growing belly, she felt a nudge from within, as if the baby, too, sensed her distress. While mingling at the charity brunch, she tried to shake off her unease. The event was teeming with art enthusiasts and high-profile donors. Clara found herself discussing a new outreach program for underprivileged youth with a woman named Samantha Harrison, a well-known patron of the arts. Samantha's warmth usually gave Clara comfort, but on this day, her focus was scattered. She noted how Richard stayed glued to the side of a statuesque blonde named Alicia Delgado, rumored to be a wealthy heiress from Spain with ties to European aristocracy. Alicia's father allegedly owned a chain of boutique hotels across Europe, a prime potential business partner for Richard's expansions. However, something about their body language felt too familiar, too charged. Whenever Alicia laughed at Richard's jokes or lightly touched his arm, Clara felt a stab of unease. She rationalized, "It's just business," but the nagging voice in her head insisted otherwise. 3 days later, the uneasy feeling solidified. Clara had asked Richard to pick up her prenatal vitamins from the pharmacy on his way home from a meeting downtown. Hours passed, and he didn't come home. When she called, his phone rang endlessly. At nearly midnight, he stumbled through the door, apologizing about an impromptu dinner with investors. The faint whiff of unfamiliar perfume clung to his suit, a heady scent that Clara was certain didn't belong to her. When pressed, Richard shrugged it off as a new cologne sample they handed out at the restaurant. Something about this explanation felt contrived. That was the first time the word affair truly flashed across Clara's mind. Still, she had no hard proof, nothing but mounting circumstantial evidence. She quietly stewed, harboring doubts that gnawed at her sanity. Meanwhile, her pregnancy progressed, and each ultrasound appointment served as a stark reminder of the life forming inside her. She knew that stress was harmful to the baby, but how could she quell it when uncertainty hung over her marriage like a gathering storm? Despite these growing suspicions, Clara found herself lying awake at night, listening to Richard's soft breathing, tears rolling down her cheeks. She wanted to cling to hope, to believe they could weather the storm, that these ominous signs were mere misunderstandings. But a quiet resolution began to take shape in her mind. She would no longer remain passive. She would find answers, for her sake and for the baby's. Clara's first attempt to confront Richard occurred on a chilly Friday evening. The household staff had left for the night, and the hush in the mansion was punctuated only by the echo of Clara's footsteps on the marble floor. She approached Richard in the study, where he was reviewing financial reports. The mahogany shelves behind him were lined with trophies and accolades, testaments to his success, achievements that once filled her with pride. "What's on your mind, darling?" he asked, barely glancing up from his work. His tone was amiable, yet distant. "I found the receipt from your tuxedo purchase in Milan," Clara began, trying to keep her voice steady. She watched carefully for any flicker in Richard's expression. "I thought you said you were in Berlin." Richard paused for a fraction of a second before closing the laptop. His face quickly softened into a mask of casual reassurance. "Yes, I flew to Berlin first. The deal there wrapped up sooner than expected, so I decided to take a detour to Milan for a day. I didn't mention it because it wasn't significant. I picked up that tux for the charity event. I didn't want to bother you with the details. You've got enough on your plate with the baby." Clara's stomach knotted. It was such an effortless, quick explanation, but she couldn't help feeling it was also practiced. "And why didn't you answer my calls that day?" she pressed. "I was worried about you." He exhaled slowly, as if dealing patiently with a child. "There was an issue with the network. My phone died, and I left my charger in the hotel. By the time I got it fixed, it was late, and Clara held up a hand to stop him. She felt a lump rising in her throat. "Richard, I know you're busy. I worry. You've been absent physically and emotionally. Something feels different." Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance or concern. She couldn't tell. He stood up and came around the desk to embrace her. "Sweetheart, you're pregnant," he murmured into her hair, "and you have every right to be emotional. But please, trust me. I'm doing everything I can to secure our future. I would never do anything to jeopardize that." His voice was warm, but Clara sensed the conversation was over before it really began. Days passed without any significant improvement. If anything, Richard seemed more guarded, more careful with his phone, more elusive about his schedule. He began stepping out of meetings at the mansion to take calls on the patio, away from Clara's earshot. On one occasion, she overheard part of a heated argument on the phone. That wasn't the arrangement Richard had snapped. We agreed on confidentiality. Confidentiality about what? Clara wondered, her heart racing. Desperate for insight, Clara turned to her best friend, Sarah Green, a woman she had known since her college days at a small liberal arts school in North Carolina. Sarah, who worked as an executive assistant at a tech startup, had always been level-headed and supportive. Over coffee at a trendy cafe near Santa Monica, Clara confided her fears, her voice trembling. Sarah listened intently, nodding with compassion. She encouraged Clara to trust her instincts. "Something is definitely off," Sarah said gently. "Even if there's a chance this is all a misunderstanding, you shouldn't have to live with this kind of stress. Talk it out or find a way to get to the truth." Clara left that meeting feeling somewhat emboldened. That night, after Richard returned from a function at the Beverly Hills Hotel, she resolved to speak up again. Once more, he dismissed her worries, chalking them up to hormones and stress. But that time, she spotted the flicker of panic in his eyes when she pressed him about Alicia Delgado. "She's just a potential investor," he insisted, eyebrows furrowed. "I'm courting her for a major development in Barcelona. Stop reading into every interaction I have with a woman." That single sentence landed like a slap across Clara's face. "Stop reading into every interaction I have with a woman." It reeked of condescension, belittling her legitimate concerns. The next day, Richard left for a week-long trip to finalize a deal in Tokyo. Later, Clara would discover that he never stepped foot in Tokyo. To the outside world, Alicia Delgado sparkled like a gem in the crown of high society. Born into Spanish aristocracy, Alicia was fluent in 5 languages, had studied art history at the Sorbonne, and was rumored to have turned down a marriage proposal from a European prince. She was tall, slender, and exuded an almost regal grace. Despite her polished facade, Alicia's personal life was wrapped in speculation, a series of whirlwind romances, alliances with powerful men in the finance world, and an uncanny ability to dodge scandal, even as gossip trailed closely behind her. Richard, it seemed, was only the latest name rumored to be connected to Alicia. On social media, she carefully cultivated an image of glamour, jets to private islands, front-row seats at Paris Fashion Week, exclusive events at the Cannes Film Festival. Clara's quiet nature clashed sharply with Alicia's showy style. Their only similarity, ironically, was a love for the arts, though Clara's was genuine and philanthropic, while Alicia's was an extension of her high-brow social persona. Suspicions about Alicia blossomed into near certainty when Sarah Green decided to do some investigating of her own. She found a string of geotagged photos on Alicia's Instagram posted at exotic destinations locations that, if traced, overlapped suspiciously with Richard's business trips. In one photo, Alicia posed at a luxury resort in Bali around the same time Richard claimed he was finalizing a licensing agreement in Hong Kong. Another photo showed Alicia toasting champagne at what looked like a swanky hotel suite in Monte Carlo, suspiciously close in date to Richard's supposed trip to Switzerland for a banking conference. None of these alone would be a smoking gun, but the pattern was too consistent to ignore. Clara's hands shook as she swiped through the images. She couldn't bring herself to confront Richard with Instagram screenshots. She knew he'd likely have an explanation or deflect blame onto her for snooping. But with each swipe, the emotional weight increased, an impending sense of heartbreak that she tried desperately to manage. Her baby's ultrasound photos were pinned on the fridge at home, a jarring contrast to the images of Alicia Delgado brandishing her curated, unbothered life of luxury. Sarah, seeing the toll this uncertainty was taking on Clara, pushed her to be more strategic. "If Richard is lying, you need undeniable proof," she warned. "Something you can confront him with, where he can't wriggle out." That same week, Alicia Delgado was tagged in a post from Paris at the Four Seasons Hotel George V, capturing a lavish lunch on a private terrace. Richard, ironically, told Clara he was heading to Berlin for 2 days to meet a German investor. Clara's heart clenched. Everything pointed to the conclusion that Richard and Alicia were together in Paris. Clara was about 6.5 months pregnant at that point, and travel was beginning to pose risks. Yet, the betrayal weighed so heavily that she found herself entertaining a drastic idea, traveling to Paris herself. She would confront them and uncover the truth. But her obstetrician had strictly advised her against long flights due to a minor complication with her pregnancy. Torn between safeguarding her own health and that of her child, and the overwhelming need for answers, Clara opted for a safer approach. She reached out to an acquaintance named David Kim, a freelance investigative reporter she had once collaborated with on an art for charity project. If anyone could trace Richard's steps with discretion, it was David. She set up a meeting at a quiet tea house in Pasadena and laid out her concerns. David was sympathetic, albeit cautious. "I'll do what I can," he told her, taking notes in a weathered notebook. "But if what you suspect is true, you might not be prepared for the outcome." Clara steeled herself. She had come this far, and she felt she owed it to herself and her unborn child to face the truth. Within 48 hours, David confirmed that Richard had boarded a flight to Paris, not Berlin. Furthermore, he found a hotel reservation under Richard Miles, an alias. The booking included 2 guests. The enormity of the betrayal shook Clara to her core. She became physically ill, retching into the bathroom sink as the weight of her world collapsed. Through the tears, however, a fierce resolve flared within her. She might be heartbroken, but she would not be a powerless victim in her own life story. Clara felt utterly drained after countless sleepless nights, her mind tormented by mounting suspicions. Exhaustion clung to her both physically because of her pregnancy and emotionally, as her thoughts spiraled into dark places. Despite living in the opulence of the Harrington mansion, she felt imprisoned by its elegant walls, which now seemed to echo with deception. Every ornate piece of furniture and expensive decoration only magnified her sense of betrayal and isolation. Her mother, Marianne, had traveled from North Carolina to help prepare for the baby. Though Marianne tried to lighten the atmosphere by rearranging the nursery or sharing gentle motherly advice, she couldn't help noticing Clara's red-rimmed eyes, unsteady gait, and the hollow note in her laughter that betrayed deep sadness. Even the mansion's staff, trained to maintain professionalism, exchanged worried glances as they observed their usually gracious mistress pacing the halls, clutching her phone, lost in anxious thought. Meanwhile, Richard announced he would be extending his European trip indefinitely. Officially, he claimed he was meeting with German financiers, pursuing profitable partnerships for Harrington Holdings. Yet David Kim, the freelance journalist Clara had secretly hired, uncovered a different story entirely. Through investigative leads, he confirmed that Richard was, in fact, in Paris, staying at the lavish Plaza Athénée Hotel under the alias Richard Miles. Worse still, David sent Clara a grainy photo of Richard stepping out of the hotel lobby hand in hand with Alicia Delgado. In the days that followed, Clara's world became a pressure cooker of fear and despair. She made repeated calls to Richard, hoping against hope for a valid explanation. All she received were clipped text messages like "busy in a meeting," "will call later," or "let's talk tomorrow." Any attempt at a FaceTime call was ignored or abruptly cancelled. Each time Clara felt the baby move inside her, her heart sank deeper. This pregnancy, a source of joy, was now tainted by the gnawing realization that her husband's affection might be elsewhere. She tried not to dwell on the betrayal she had all but confirmed, yet the bitter taste of heartbreak was unavoidable. Throughout this ordeal, Sarah Green, Clara's closest friend, visited the mansion daily. Understanding Clara's gentle yet vulnerable nature, Sarah did all she could to help, cooking nutritious meals to keep Clara's strength up, suggesting calming playlists, and most importantly, offering a safe space to vent her swirling emotions. However, Sarah's own frustration simmered beneath her comforting presence. She was furious at Richard for putting Clara through such agony, especially while pregnant. Sarah knew too well that Clara's patience had its limits, and that if things escalated, the situation could spiral out of control. Late one afternoon, Clara received a brief, emotionless text from Richard. "I have to extend my trip. Urgent matters have come up." One short line, with no further explanation, was enough to crush what remained of her fragile hopes. For weeks, she had convinced herself that maybe there was an innocent reason for all the discrepancies. Now, she could no longer ignore the undeniable signs. Clara walked into her bedroom, locked the door, and wept silently. She could almost hear the walls of the mansion closing in, trapping her in a gilded cage of heartbreak. That night, once Marianne and Sarah had gone to rest, Clara summoned the courage to call David Kim again. Her voice trembled, a mix of desperation and resolve. "David, the first need to talk to Richard while he's with Alicia. I want to hear them, maybe even see them if possible. Please, can you record everything?" David paused, clearly concerned. "Are you absolutely certain, Clara? Sometimes reality is even harsher than suspicion." Clara gripped her phone, her breath ragged. "I have no choice. I need to face this. I can't live in the dark any longer." David explained his plan. Already in Europe for another assignment, he could head to Paris on short notice. Through his sources, he discovered that Richard and Alicia had booked a table at Le Jules Verne, the upscale restaurant on the second level of the Eiffel Tower, for the following evening. Known for its sweeping views of the City of Light, it was a favorite spot for couples seeking a romantic night out. David promised to be there, armed with his camera, to gather indisputable evidence. "I'll text you when I spot them at their table, and you call Richard then. I'll film it all from a discreet distance." Clara exhaled, relief and dread intermingling. "Thank you. I don't know how else I could do this." Back in her bedroom, Clara spent the night watching the clock. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Fear, anger, and a faint, stubborn hope wrestled within her heart. Could it be possible that all these pieces were misleading? Some last spark of denial flitted across her mind, but the ache in her chest told her otherwise. She could only pray for strength, especially with a baby on the way who deserved a stable home. The next day crawled by. Clara forced herself to eat a few spoonfuls of soup her mother prepared, but her nerves churned. That afternoon, David's text arrived. "They're here, seated by the window." "Get ready." Clara locked her bedroom door, sat on the edge of her bed, and tried to steady her trembling hands. The clock struck the agreed-upon time, and she dialed Richard's number. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, sweetheart," he greeted, his voice slightly breathless. "It's late there. Is everything okay?" Clara fought to keep her emotions in check. How could I not call my husband? "Tell me, how's Berlin?" There was a split-second pause. Berlin is fine. Very productive," he said, but an undercurrent of tension bled into his words. "Listen, I'm kinda tied up. Can we talk tomorrow?" In the background, Clara heard the soft clink of wine glasses and snippets of French being spoken by waitstaff and diners, a far cry from anything in Germany. Her pulse pounded. "Funny," she said quietly. "I hear French. Are you at a French restaurant in Berlin?" An uneasy silence. Finally he spoke. "It's a French-themed bistro here. It's a popular spot." Clara's throat tightened as she pushed harder, determined to expose him. "Could we do a quick FaceTime? I want you to see me, and our baby is really active. You could see how big I've gotten." A tense hush seeped through the line. Then Richard spoke, sounding frazzled. I can't FaceTime right now, Clara. I'm in the middle of discussing some important numbers with an associate." Meanwhile, at Le Jules Verne, David Kim, hidden behind a decorative planter on the terrace, was capturing the entire scene on camera. Through his lens, he caught Richard, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, across from Alicia in a sleek evening gown. Their body language was unmistakably intimate. Their hands were intertwined. Alicia looked faintly amused, perhaps unaware of the bomb that had just gone off. Richard's expression, however, was panicked. He was staring at his phone, clearly unsure how to calm his wife's pointed questions from half a world away. Clara steeled herself. She had all the confirmation she needed. "You're lying to me, Richard," she said, voice quivering with anger and sorrow. "I'm done pretending we have a normal marriage." Richard sputtered. "Clara, maybe you're stressed. We can sort all this out once I'm back." She cut him off, her tone turning icily calm. "My mother's here. I'm fine. I deserve the truth about everything. But if you won't give it to me, I'll find it myself." With that, she ended the call, tears cascading down her cheeks. The phone dropped from her hand onto the bed. She pressed her palms over her eyes, overcome by a tidal wave of grief. On the other side of the Atlantic, David Kim continued filming as Richard fumbled to pocket his phone, his face a haunted mix of guilt and alarm. In that moment, the future of the Harrington family changed irrevocably. Richard's fragile web of deception was laid bare, and Clara's courageous act of confronting her worst fears ignited a chain reaction that could not be undone. There would be no more illusions and no more grace notes of denial. The cost of betrayal had finally come due, and the once enchanting world of opulence they'd built now stood on the verge of collapse. In the immediate aftermath of Clara's abrupt hang-up, chaos ensued at Le Jules Verne. Richard stared at his phone, a tumult of emotions crossing his usually confident features: anger, embarrassment, and a flicker of fear. Alicia, unaware of the details but sensing the tension, leaned forward. "Is everything all right, darling?" she asked, her voice laced with concern tinged by vanity. She had invested considerable time and energy into her dalliance with Richard, and any disruption to the facade threatened her lavish lifestyle. Richard shoved his phone into his jacket pocket, scanning the restaurant as if half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows. "We need to go," he muttered, fumbling for his wallet to settle the bill. He felt exposed, as though Clara's voice on the phone had supernaturally placed her in the same room. Alicia offered him a quizzical look, but his panicked expression left little room for debate. Outside the restaurant, David Kim captured video of the couple, hastily stepping into a chauffeured Mercedes. For Richard, the night had been ruined. The meal, the wine, the ambience, it all seemed suddenly cheapened by the guilt twisting in his gut. He knew that phone call from Clara signaled a turning point, a breakdown in whatever illusions he had tried to maintain. Back in Los Angeles, Clara's tears had subsided into a numb resolve. She realized their marriage, at least the version of it she had cherished, was over. The next morning brought more revelations. David Kim emailed Clara the footage and photos he had taken, along with a short note: "I'm sorry, Clara. You deserve better. Take care of yourself. The media files told a stark story. There was Richard, elegantly dressed, wineglass in hand, gazing at Alicia like a besotted lover. No plausible denial could spin these images into something innocent. Clara's stomach churned as she replayed the videos over and over, each viewing hammering the final nail in the coffin of her trust. She wanted to hate Richard, but heartbreak overshadowed everything. That same afternoon, Sarah Green arrived to find Clara pale and shaken. She gently helped her friend onto the sofa and played the videos on Clara's laptop. "That's all the proof you need," Sarah said, her voice trembling with sadness and anger. "I'm so sorry. But at least now you know." Clara nodded, her eyes glassy, tears threatening anew. "I have to figure out what to do next." Sarah took her hand, unwavering support shining in her eyes. "Whatever you decide, I have your back." Hours later, the phone rang Richard. Perhaps he believed he could smooth talk his way out of this. Clara let it ring the first few times, ignoring him as she tried to collect her thoughts. She was no longer the naive, docile wife. She was a mother-to-be, fiercely protective, and determined not to tolerate any more deceit. Finally, she answered. "Clara, listen," Richard began, his voice testy, the polished veneer cracking. "I'm cutting my trip short. There's obviously been a misunderstanding. I'd like to come home and talk." In the background, Clara heard the bustle of what could be an airport lounge. Part of her was glad, part of her dreaded the confrontation. Yet she found her voice surprisingly steady. "Fine," she said, "but don't expect me to pretend nothing's happened." Richard exhaled sharply. "I'll be home tomorrow night." Before hanging up, Clara added, "One more thing, Richard. Don't lie to me anymore. I have evidence. I know everything." He was silent for a moment. "Clara, I just want to fix this. I want to be there for you and the baby." She ended the call without responding, tears streaming down her face. She braced for the storm that was about to descend upon her life. The day after the ill-fated dinner at Le Jules Verne, Richard found himself stranded in Paris, wrestling with a business crisis while simultaneously trying to salvage the train wreck of his personal life. Alicia lingered in the luxurious suite, trailing him with concerned glances, her arms often crossed in quiet frustration. She wasn't used to playing second fiddle to anyone, let alone a pregnant wife thousands of miles away. Between phone calls to Harrington Holdings and attempts to contact Clara, Richard was bombarded with messages from his staff. An investor had withdrawn from a lucrative project in Dubai, presumably spooked by rumors of instability in Richard's personal dealings. Gossip in high society circles spreads quickly. Although no official tabloids had run the story yet, the hush of speculation was enough to rattle business alliances. Richard could feel the foundation of his empire trembling with each new phone call. Alicia tried to console him with affectionate gestures, pouring expensive champagne, suggesting they relax at the hotel spa or take a day trip to Versailles. But Richard's mind was elsewhere, locked on the chain reaction that a scandal would trigger. If his high-profile investors got wind of an ugly marital situation, it could tarnish his carefully cultivated image. In truth, the business fallout worried him as much as losing Clara. Or is it more? He asked himself in a rare moment of introspection. He had once loved Clara deeply. Did he still? If so, how had he let it get to this point? A frustrated Alicia eventually confronted him. "What is your plan, Richard? Are you leaving me behind here in Paris?" Her eyes narrowed, voice low. "We had an agreement your wife wasn't supposed to find out." He dragged a hand through his hair, exasperation etched on his face. "I'm dealing with it," he snapped. "You don't get to question me about how I handle my marriage." Alicia bristled, turning away to stare at the cityscape outside the window. For a moment, it appeared she might pack her bags and return to Spain. But leaving now, with so much still uncertain, might jeopardize her own interests. Whether she truly cared for Richard or not was debatable. What she craved was stability, wealth, and the social standing that came with being linked to a powerful man. Still, the tension between them was palpable. Gone was the fantasy of a carefree Parisian romance. The suite felt claustrophobic, infused with the stench of anxiety. Richard's phone rang for the 10th time that morning, his legal advisor, no doubt. Alicia rolled her eyes, slipping into the bathroom to give him some semblance of privacy. The illusions they had spun were unraveling rapidly, revealing the ugly truths beneath. By evening, Richard had made plans to return to Los Angeles, booking a first-class flight on Air France. Alicia, however, remained in the suite, uncertain if she should follow. "When will I see you again?" she asked, softly, as he stuffed clothes haphazardly into his suitcase. Richard paused, staring at her with conflicted eyes. "I don't know," he admitted. "Let me sort out the chaos at home. I'll contact you." As the door closed behind him, Alicia Delgado was left to contemplate a future that seemed far less guaranteed than it had yesterday. Meanwhile, Richard was on his way back to face a reckoning he had never wanted or anticipated. Richard Harrington's arrival at LAX was not met with the usual fanfare of a private car service. Instead, Sarah Green was there, arms crossed, wearing a look that could slice through steel. She had insisted to Clara that someone else drive him home, ensuring he was stripped of his typical comforts from the moment he set foot on American soil. In the back seat of Sarah's modest sedan, Richard shifted uncomfortably, phone clutched in his hand. He tried to make small talk, but Sarah shut him down with a cutting glare. "Don't you dare pretend this is business as usual," she snapped, eyes flicking up to the rearview mirror. "You've hurt Clara more than you can imagine." Richard looked away, the weight of shame pressing on him. Yet, as they wove through La Traffic, he also steeled himself for the argument that awaited. He had a strategy: deny what he could, minimize the rest, and salvage at least some portion of his marriage. But can it be saved? A nagging voice asked. At the mansion, Clara sat in the living room, visibly pale, her belly prominent beneath a soft cotton dress. On the glass coffee table rested a thick envelope containing the photos and a USB stick with the incriminating footage David Kim had collected. She had considered discarding it all, but a part of her wanted Richard to see that she was armed with more than just intuition. When he entered, tension filled the room like a toxic cloud. He tried to approach her, but she lifted a hand, palm outward. Her eyes, though red-rimmed, were fierce. "No, don't touch me. Not until we talk," he swallowed. "Clara, I know you're upset," she cut him off, pointing to the envelope. "Look at that. I'm not going to say another word until you see it." Reluctantly, Richard opened the envelope, flipping through the photos and pulling out the USB drive. He inserted it into a laptop that Sarah had placed on the coffee table. The living room filled with the damning images of him and Alicia, strolling hand in hand, wine glasses clinking, Alicia leaning her head on his shoulder. The final nail was the short video clip from Le Jules Verne capturing their intimate dinner. Richard watched in silence, his posture collapsing. Clara finally spoke, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and heartbreak. "How long?" Richard's eyes darted to Sarah, who stood by the doorway with folded arms. "Sarah, can you give us a moment alone?" She shook her head. "Not until Clara tells me to leave." Clara didn't dismiss Sarah. Instead, she stared Richard down, waiting. Finally, he offered a choked confession. "A few months," he mumbled. "It started when Alicia invested in our Barcelona development." It just happened. It just happened," Clara echoed bitterly. "That's your excuse. Do you have any idea what it's been like for me, carrying your child while you gallivant around the world with another woman?" He struggled to maintain composure. "Clara, it wasn't about love. It was a fling, a mistake. I swear I still love you. I was stupid, reckless. Please, don't throw away our marriage for a moment of madness." She let out a harsh laugh, tears spilling over. "A moment? You've been lying to me for months. You missed doctor's appointments. You left me in the dark while I was terrified and alone carrying our child." Richard dropped to his knees in front of her, ignoring Sarah's presence. "I'll do anything," he begged. "I'll cut Alicia off completely. I'll see a counselor. Whatever you need, please, I can't lose you." For the first time in weeks, Clara felt a pang of pity for him, but it was quickly overshadowed by fury. She closed her eyes, tears rolling down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again. You broke us, Richard. Do you understand that?" He nodded slowly. "But I will fix it. I promise." With a trembling hand, Clara removed her wedding ring, placing it on the coffee table. "I'm not sure there's anything left to fix," she whispered. The finality of that gesture landed like a shot in the silent room. Sarah watched, her heart aching for her friend. In the end, Clara asked for space-time to think about whether she could salvage any semblance of a future with him. Richard, unable to stand her cold, resolute gaze, retreated to a guest suite in the mansion. The next few days passed like a tense ceasefire. He tried repeatedly to talk to her, to profess his remorse and desperation, but she shut him out. She needed clarity, and only time could provide that. The next month proved to be a long, grueling interlude. Clara focused on her health, attending regular checkups. Her mother stayed by her side, and Sarah visited daily, cooking meals and helping reorganize the baby's nursery. The staff at the mansion tiptoed around, unsure how to navigate the charged atmosphere. Richard immersed himself in damage control at Harrington Holdings, repairing investor relations that had begun to fray after rumors of his scandal spread through whispered channels. The question weighing on everyone's mind was whether Clara would stay and fight for the marriage or end it. Richard arranged for a high-profile couples therapist, Dr. Rochelle Pennington, to visit them privately. He pleaded with Clara to attend at least one session. She agreed, if only to gauge whether there was any foundation left to rebuild upon. In the stark, tastefully decorated office of Dr. Pennington, Clara sat on one side of the couch, arms protectively around her belly, while Richard perched stiffly on the other side, his hands clasped so tightly that his knuckles turned white. The hour was filled with raw disclosures. Richard confessed that the affair was a misguided attempt to escape the crushing stress of his business life. Alicia had been an alluring distraction, and he never intended for it to unravel his family. Clara wept, explaining how betrayed and humiliated she felt, how she didn't know if she could ever forgive him or trust him again. Dr. Pennington's verdict was nuanced. Forgiveness, she explained, was a journey that could take years. Rebuilding trust after such a profound betrayal was possible, but only if both parties were wholeheartedly committed and if the offender was willing to accept full responsibility and transparency. If Clara couldn't see a genuine transformation in Richard, or if she couldn't open her heart again, the marriage would be doomed. Days later, an unexpected event forced Clara's hand. She went into early labor. Whether it was the stress or a natural complication, her water broke nearly 4 weeks before her due date. In the frantic rush to the hospital, Richard was at her side, racked with worry. By the time they reached Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Clara was in active labor, her contractions coming fast and strong. Nurses prepped her for delivery, hooking her up to the fourth fluids and monitoring the baby's heart rate. As the hours rolled on, Clara fought through the pain, tears mingling with sweat. Richard held her hand, whispering words of support and remorse, uncertain if his presence was welcomed, but determined not to leave. In a dramatic, painful finale, Clara gave birth to a baby girl, a tiny yet determined child who cried the moment she entered the world. as if already aware of the turbulent circumstances of her arrival. Exhausted, Clara sobbed as the newborn was placed on her chest. At that moment, all the anger and betrayal receded into the background. What mattered was this fragile, precious life. Richard, too, wept openly, gently placing a trembling hand on his daughter's head. For a while, in that hospital room, they were just two parents marveling at a newborn miracle, temporarily freed from the shadows that had haunted them. But as the days passed and they returned to the mansion, reality set in. A baby introduced a fresh layer of stress and sleepless nights, testing the bonds of an already battered relationship. Clara eventually decided to stay, at least temporarily, allowing Richard a chance to prove his sincerity. She insisted on a strict regimen of therapy sessions, total financial transparency, and zero contact with Alicia Delgado. Richard complied, ready to sacrifice any measure of pride or convenience to keep his family. His company took a hit as he redirected more time to home life, but ironically, this might have been the best thing for him. For the first time, he was forced to step back and re-evaluate the relentless chase for wealth and influence. In the months that followed, cracks remained. Clara would sometimes wake in the middle of the night, haunted by images of Richard and Alicia in Paris. But she also saw genuine efforts by her husband, late-night feedings so she could rest, heartfelt conversations where he laid his soul bare, a willingness to let Clara set boundaries on nearly every aspect of their interaction. It was not a swift or easy process, but slowly, the glimmer of mutual affection re-emerged. They were not fully healed, perhaps never would be in the same way, but they were forging a new path, built upon painful lessons learned. Whether that path would lead to a stronger marriage or eventually diverge into separate roads remained uncertain. But for now, they navigated each day as best they could, united by their daughter's needs and the faint hope that, amidst all the betrayal and pain, love could still find a way. What began as a fairy tale marriage in a world of wealth and endless possibility quickly turned into a cautionary tale of lies and betrayal. Yet, even in the darkest chapters of heartbreak, hope flickered like a fragile candle. Clara's determination to uncover the truth was met with anguish, but also offered her the strength to demand honesty and respect. For Richard, the harrowing journey of being exposed and nearly losing everything became a call to face his own failings and seek redemption if redemption was indeed possible. Will their relationship endure the cracks left by deception, or will Clara's heartbreak push her to carve a new life, free from the shadows of Richard's affair? Only time will tell. Thank you for following this dramatic saga. If this story captivated you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Stay tuned for more real-life drama fiction that keeps you on the edge of your seat.